breakout room will be devoted to a paper by Dr. Hans van Eyghen, who is assistant professor of philosophy at Tilburg University and who got his PhD at the Department of Philosophy at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. So he has been closely cooperating with and even within the Abraham Kuyper Center for many years. Mm-hmm. And Hans will be talking to us about fine-tuning the sources of theology. Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, let's begin with a brief word of thanks for the organizer for putting this together, despite of the troubles with online events and the hybrid events and all. Very much appreciated. I really enjoyed following some of the sessions online yesterday because I couldn't be here, but I do like the fact that I don't have to worry about technicalities or internet connection right now, so thank you for the technical stuff as well for making this possible. Okay, let's turn to the matter at hand, see if this worked. Guess this one. The red one?
The green one?
Green one?
No.
Do I have to point somewhere? Okay, I'll start by general introducing the theme. Like the progress of this winter seminar is like progress in theology. Like, is there progress and what kind of progress? What does progress amount to? I will be arguing, yes, there is progress of a certain kind at least. I won't be making a general case for the importance of progress or studying all the details of what progress could be. Argue that there is a certain kind of progress in theology. And this kind of progress, which I've learned from yesterday from Professor Van den Brink's talk, would probably amount to interparadigmatic progress, so progress within a certain paradigm of Christian theology. But of course, I won't dwell on that because this was new information yesterday. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. First, briefly, about what is progress in science or in any academic discipline. Then we'll move to theology. Is there progress there? What would progress be there? And then focus on zooming in on one particular kind of progress in theology, how we use our theological sources, with the particular Christian theological sources mainly. And then we'll zoom in even further to religious experience as a certain source of knowledge in theology and how there can be progress there. First, what is progress in science? Now, I'm speaking, of course, from a Western European Dutch background where science is a much broader term than in the Anglo-Saxon world, where science is mainly confined to the natural sciences. Here it's much broader. Philosophy is often ranked among the sciences, history usually is, and theology sometimes is as well. So science is used as that broad sense of science, not the narrow sense of natural sciences in the Anglo-Saxon world. So what is progress in any scientific discipline, or any academic discipline, if you prefer? Well, my proposal is that progress is, you get progress if you gain more knowledge or understanding of the object of study within a certain discipline. I will illustrate this with an example, like look to physics. What are physicists studying? Like a lot of things, one main thing has always been the atom or elementary particles. So when do we speak of progress in physics? When you gain more knowledge or more understanding of those elementary particles of the atom and related features. See how do physicists conduct their work, like an older picture and a newer one. Maybe some of you recognize what is on these pictures. On the left, you have the great Werner Heisenberg, I believe, the great physicist. Over 100 years ago, I think he was working. He did a lot of groundbreaking work on the atom, on elementary particles. This is a picture of how he was studying it, like in a lab with all these complicated things, machines, assistants. Looks very complex, but still quite old-fashioned. If you look to the right, you get a very different world. You might recognize this more. This is the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. It's also used nowadays to study these elementary particles. So what I'm really suggesting here, part of the advancement in physics is due to better means of studying these elementary particles. Something has changed there because of technology especially. They are now able to study these particles better in 222 than in 1922 when Heisenberg was working, partly because of these new technological innovations. This Hadron Collider yielded more knowledge. It confirmed the existence of a Higgs boson, for example. Also knows more about how particles interact with each other, what their various functions is, what they do, and can yield a lot more knowledge potentially. So this is really the argument I'm trying to make for when there is a certain kind of progress in any scientific discipline. You gain progress if you get more knowledge of the object you're studying. And here's the crux, what I'll be defending, what I'll be focusing in this talk. Better means of obtaining that knowledge leads to more knowledge in general of the object in study. If you are able to study it better, by means of a better machine, by means of a better method of gaining knowledge, you will be able to get progress. You get more knowledge and you'll get progress. Of course, this isn't the only way of achieving progress. Some of this has been highlighted in talks today and yesterday. You can also apply the methods of gaining knowledge better. This is, for example, exemplified by the previous talk. I forgot her name, but she mentioned how thinking harder on divine foreknowledge and its relation to libertarian free will, you get better solutions if you build on your predecessors, like Anselm built on Boethius, who was building on Augustine. Just by applying reason better, they were able to reach a more satisfying, a better result, which might be an example of that. Time is also an issue. If you have more time to think of something, if you have more time to use a certain means, you will also get more knowledge. As you use the Hadron Collider longer in Geneva, you will get new breakthroughs and you'll get more information on elementary particles. Of course, there can be unexpected breakthroughs and other means as well, but I won't go into detail on that. So what this focus on the means of achieving knowledge highlights is the importance of other disciplines. Of course, the Hadron Collider in Geneva wasn't built by physicists, not solely by physicists at least. They got a lot of help from engineers, probably from other disciplines as well, and by means of the help of those, they were able to construct better means of getting knowledge of elementary particles. But these do work in conjunction with physicists, and something similar will be going on as I argue in theology. So now moving to theology. I will stick to a definition of theology that's been used in different talks today and yesterday as well, considering theology as a study of God. Theologians are studying God. There are other definitions abound, like studying religious behavior, studying religious rituals, studying religion in general as a human phenomenon, but I won't be discussing that. I will stick to the traditional definition like others did here as well during this winter seminar. Theologians are studying God foremost. So, following my line of reasoning from before, as in any academic discipline, theologians make progress if they get more knowledge of understanding of their object of study. Given that their object of study is God, you get more theological knowledge if you gain more knowledge of God. And so one way of achieving that knowledge, as I have argued, is by having better means of achieving that knowledge, better means of gaining knowledge. So what are the means of gaining knowledge in theology, at least in Christian theology? There have been various traditional accounts. There has been some disagreements among denominations as well, of course. But there's quite general agreement that these 5 are some of the main ones of getting knowledge of God in Christian theology. We know God through self-revelation, which is written down in Scripture, the Bible. We can also know God by rational reflection, as exemplified again during the last talk, doing various reasoning, using various arguments, using natural theology. So testimony, how other people have talked about God, have reflected on God, which is reflected in tradition. There's also of growing importance, like the book of nature. You can know God by looking at creation, as affirmed in St. Paul already, and also affirmed in various traditional accounts. There's our general revelation. You can know the mind of God and know the nature of God by studying nature. And there's also experience. People have certain experience of God or believe to have certain experiences which they believe that have been from God. So here's like a brief summary. It was in the abstract as well. So for each source, there's our methods of gaining knowledge there that you can apply in any of these subdisciplines, and also examples of progress. If you look at Scripture, for example, what do you do if you want to gain knowledge from Scripture, from the Bible? You're going to use exegesis. You're going to really read what's in there, really trying to understand what's written there. You're going to draw on history, what we know from the ancient Near East, what was going on there, what was the political situation, what was the social situation, what sort of influences were going on. There's information from archaeology that's been drawn on. There's information from linguistics, and probably some others as well. And by applying these insights from exegesis, history, archaeology, and linguistics better, you get progress. We are able to understand Scripture better than we did before. Because of the information of Babylonian accounts of creation, for example, we can compare it to the story of Genesis. Because of advancement in our understanding of biblical Hebrew, we can have a better grasp of what certain terms mean. For example, the hapax legomena, which pop up only once throughout the whole Bible. I won't discuss all of them in detail since I don't have sufficient time, but focus again on, let's take tradition. There's also the idea we can know something about the nature of God by studying how other people have reflected on God. So, of course, it's very hard to look at all of tradition at once yourself. You can rely on other sources, but you can look okay, I'm back. But just by looking at what insights can be made from linguistics or reappraise of theological thought from before, you get new insights. Now we have more information on how to read Thomas in Neo-Thomism. You have more information on how to read Augustine in Neo-Augustinianism, and you have more information how to read other thinkers that can lead to new information on how to think of God and get more knowledge of God. For the remainder of this talk, I will be focusing on experience. Experience is generally considered as a means of getting knowledge as well, and I will argue we get insights here from cognitive science of religion and from cognitive neuroscience, and I will give some examples that can be regarded as genuine progress. Oh yeah, the importance of other disciplines, I'm going to skip over this is clear. Experience. So people have experience they believe to be of God, and believe these can give us knowledge of God. And come in various forms. Yeah, I'm going to go over this quickly as well. But there's always been some doubts, like, do they really provide are they a reliable source of knowledge? There's general agreement they provide some knowledge of God, but it's always been approached with some caution. Experiences are highly individualized, highly personalized sometimes, and can diverge. Some people have experiences of Jesus, of some saint, others of Shiva, others of Buddha. So there seems to be a lot of differences going on there. And also experience can have sort of nefarious consequences. They can lead to like tribal thinking, cult-like thinking, very detrimental, very sinister group dynamics can occur from religious experiences. These are reasons that are regarded as reasons to look with certain caution to religious experience. Like here as an example, I don't know if you remember this guy, Fred Phelps from the Westboro Baptist Church. It's an example of how religious experience can have very nefarious consequences. He's been reported to have a very profound experience of God when he was of young age, and it led him to form a very strict new church. And you might remember him from a certain website they are running. I'm not going to repeat the name completely. God hates blank. So you can see how experiences can really have very nasty consequences. And this has also been a reason, tradition, to look with certain caution to religious experiences. This has led to a certain call for checks on religious experiences. To see, are they in line with revelation? Do they have certain personal effects on human lives? Do they need to be checked? These are certain checks, whether to avoid, how do I turn back? These implications, or to avoid the highly personalized nature of some religious experiences. So, can we apply insights from other disciplines to sort of solve this problem, or to get more traction on when religious experiences produces knowledge and when not? Like we did with archaeology for the Bible, like we did with a better study of theological sources from predecessors in tradition? I think we can, if we look at cognitive science and cognitive neuroscience, because there is a lot of data from studying how people have religious experiences and what's really going on in the mind, which is what cognitive scientists do. I'll give 2 examples. Like, we have fairly good data that sometimes religious experiences are distorted by certain biases or certain inclinations in our mind. Like, I won't delve into the evolutionary roots of this problem, but there's a general agreement that what humans can process in their mind is fairly limited. We have limited computational power, we have limited storage space, so this leads to certain distortions on our experiences. Thinking about God, some have argued we are prone to regard God to process God as we do humans. Thinking about God's mind will often make the comparison to human minds. Can God think? Can God believe? Can God have emotions? Our model to answer those questions will be humans. So given that, we'll make certain mistakes easily. They have done this test with people, asking, can God know everything at once? Can God be appeased by certain emotions? Can God be afraid? The traditional Orthodox answers to most of these are no, or more or less. But if you put people under certain time constraints or certain stress, they will resort back to their human model of the mind and answer these questions in comparison to human. And they will answer yes. God processes one thing after another. God can be appeased by emotions, or God can be afraid, because they look to the human model in their reasoning, because they're having a hard time processing this counterintuitive idea of God, this other mind, which is very different from human minds. They'll tend to make mistakes, and these might manifest in religious experiences. So yeah, it's very hard to process God as a trinity. They will often resort to a human model, an anthropomorphic model of God. So we learn here from cognitive science that human cognition goes astray under time pressure and under stress, that we're having a hard time processing the idea of God then. And we have fairly solid data, if you ask me. I can tell you more in the Q&A if you want to, that there's something suspicious about religious experiences ahead under time pressure or under stress. We have a criterion there furnished by cognitive science to treat some religious experiences with caution and others maybe not. A different example, focusing on these sinister consequences this should be, like how religious experiences can foster Fred Phelps-like thinking, like foster hatred or foster groupthink. We know from general cognitive science that humans are highly influenceable, that they often are mindful about what other people around them are thinking, and this influences their cognition, this influences their experiences. They often look at authoritative figures, think cults, think this guy, remember him, Jim Jones, of the People's Temple, who committed mass suicide in Guyana. By influence of this authoritative figure, because of his charisma, people looked at the world in a different way and had different experiences, also different religious experiences. It's also the idea of credibility enhancing displays. If you add certain behavior that can make your beliefs more credible, make your behavior more credible, people will be influenced by that as well. I'm wrapping up here. So here we have another reason to disregard or treat certain experiences with more caution. Cognitive scientists have pointed that these influences of prestige figures, of authoritative charismatic figures, are stronger in high arousal group settings, like highly confined, very emotionally charged services. People will tend to be more influenced by authoritative figures then. So we have fairly good evidence to treat these experiences with somewhat more caution maybe than others. So this is my intermediate conclusion. Like cognitive neuroscience, I've given 2 examples, can shed more light when certain experiences result from distorted information, think under stress or under situations of fear, and when there's influence of sinister influences. think in highly aroused group settings. So they can highlight settings where an experience can easily go astray. And by consequence, regard those who are not in those settings as not going astray or less likely to go astray. Therefore, we have a reason to think that there can be progress gained by using this information from cognitive neuroscience to see whether when a source leads to more knowledge of God and when it does not. And we have examples of progress in theology. This is all I have. Thank you for attention, and I welcome the floor to questions.
Okay, and keep in mind that these questions may come from those here around, but also from the 10 of us, I believe, 12 even, who are participating in the Zoom part. Michiel Bouwman.